Norval, can you hear me? Just making
Sure
sure.
can.
All right, great. Thank you guys for attending today. Just a couple logistics. So I have presented this presentation a couple times live. I'm used to presenting and being in front of crowds, but I will say that this is my first webinar. So I'm very much looking forward to your feedback. Let me know how things can be improved for future if I do any more webinars moving forward, because I'm sure there are some nuances that that may not apply to webinars that do apply in real life and vice versa. So this is a learning experience for me. So thank you guys for the opportunity. As Norval said, my name is Eric Rothwell. I am from Southwest Virginia. I've spent about 22 years working in multiple industries, mostly in IT, and got into project management around 2003 and was certified in 2004. So I've been doing project management and or some sort of a leadership role around the project management function ever since then. And as many of you may be aware, a large part of project management is change management. So if you're implementing a project, you need to manage the change that is going along with that project, whether it be a new system or a new capability or a new process. You need to make sure that the people that are affected by that new item or that new product knows how to use it and can adopt it effectively and therefore get the value out of it that is expected. So over the years, change management has evolved and has become, it's grown beyond just a component of project management and has really matured into its own process and methodology in and of itself. And so that's the purpose of today's presentation, and I just want to dive into that a little bit deeper. The primary focus of today's presentation is I would like to provide you guys with the tools that you need to implement a successful change management capability within your organization. Part of that is being able to sell it to your leaders, making sure that they are willing to invest in it where it makes sense for the size and complexity of your organization. And so I'm hoping that by the end of today's conversation that you have some information that you can then take back to your organization and start that process of maturing your change management capability. So I've talked about my background, my current work. I currently work for Anthem, the insurance company. My office is in downtown Roanoke, Virginia. But I am currently working in the federal employee program, and what we do is focus on healthcare or health insurance solutions for non-military federal employees. And I'm working in the IT division for that federal employee program. So it's almost like a company within Anthem. And so what my focus is process improvement and governance for the PMO that manages all of the IT projects within the federal employee program. So I do manage a couple large projects, but the focus of those is mainly as I develop new processes, I sort of eat my own dog food, so to speak, and I implement my new processes in my own projects to make sure that they make sense, and then and that way when I roll things out to the rest of the project managers, then I can say, look, I know this works because I've done it myself, and it just kind of gets me a little bit further, a little bit more street cred, if you will, that I actually follow my own processes. But my primary focus is more of a leadership type role as opposed to the daily running of projects, and just sort of how my career has progressed. So that's my current work. Based on today, as Norval said, let's try to make this an interactive conversation. If you have questions, I can't see because I'm dealing with a single screen on my laptop, I can't actually see the chat window right now. So if you write something and it requires me to stop, Norval will interrupt me. But if it's something I can answer quickly, I'll do it and then move forward. If it's something that I know I'm going to cover later in the presentation, I will do that and just let you know, hey, we're going to talk about that in the next couple slides. Or if it's something that is a little bit more lengthy, I may push it off to the end. But feel free to interject with questions or comments if it makes sense. And let's try to have some fun over the next hour. Okay, so a source of a lot of the information in my presentation is from an organization called ProSci. And I had the opportunity to attend a certification class presented by ProSci a couple years ago, and I found it very useful, very applicable. It's a very scalable process that they teach that can be applied in your personal life as well as in your professional life. And it is all about how to facilitate change management. I've got the link to ProSci there. If you're interested in learning more, please visit that. Again, I will be providing these slides after the fact. But a lot of the diagrams and graphics and things in my presentation come from ProSci. One of the nice things about going through the certification class, part of the fee that you pay for being certified covers the license for being able to share their information. So I am licensed to be able to present this and provide this information and leverage their templates and all of those types of things. So that in and of itself provides value to your organization if you were to choose to pursue this certification. Just some background on ProSci. They apply scientific principles and research to organizational settings in order to achieve greater outcomes. They've created the largest body of knowledge on organizational change management in the world to date. And they focus on research, best practices, training, and certifications. And their certification is complementary to and reinforces the Certified Change Management Professional certification through the Association of Change Management Professionals. So this is a certification that's over and beyond and complementary to that Certified Change Management Professional certification. So the presentation objectives today are to provide an overview of OCM and sort of define what it is and what it is not, to make the case for developing a formal OCM capability, and then lastly, to discuss important considerations when implementing an OCM capability. Okay, what is OCM? So according to ProSci, one of their research findings is the #1 obstacle to success for major change projects is employee resistance and the ineffective management of the people side of change. So you'll notice this theme throughout my presentation. What we're talking about here is basically how to work with people in order to be effective in implementing changes to make your projects successful. So it's really about it's all about the people, because they're the ones that are doing the work. They're the ones that have to make the changes, and they're the ones that have to adopt the new processes and products that you're delivering. So it's really without the people, you can have the best project in the world, but without people, it's really useless because the people are really what matter. OCM is the process, tools, and techniques to manage the people side of change to achieve the required business results. So that is really the short definition of OCM. And when I say OCM, just to clarify, that acronym stands for Organizational Change Management. ProSci refers to Organizational Change Management, or OCM, simply as, quote, change management. I'm using the OCM acronym to differentiate it from other types of change management, such as project change management and product change management. So we're not talking about new features for a software application, or maybe a change to your project schedule or an increase in your scope. What we're talking about is a change to how your organization does work. And so that's why we're calling it Organizational Change Management, or OCM. All right. So first, to start off with, making the business case for OCM. So this is all about how to sell this, the need to your leadership, to let them understand why you feel this is necessary and how it could add value to your organization moving forward. So what are the primary benefits of applying OCM to a project? I will just go through a few of these. OCM increases the probability of project success and the realization of desired outcomes. It helps mitigate perceived negative consequences and manage employee resistance to change. Because change is hard, and even if people don't have nefarious intent, sometimes they just are so used to the old way of doing things that they resist change sort of subconsciously. And so OCM, a formal OCM capability, will help you combat that and sort of get over that hump. OCM helps build change competency into the organization. And being able to handle change well, it truly is an art as well as a science. Especially now, things change very quickly. And if you are in an organization that can adapt quickly and just sort of go with the flow, then you're going to be much better off than companies or organizations that are very resistant to change and are slow to adapt. So the quicker you can adapt and the more agile you can be in adopting change and embracing change, the more successful you'll be as an organization. And then finally, OCM helps minimize the payback period, or the amount of time it'll take to get your money back for the investment in your project, and maximize your return on investment for the project. And it does this by really three areas of focus. It optimizes the speed of adoption, so that's the amount of time it takes to adopt a change. The ultimate utilization. So let's just, as an example, if you're putting a new process or a new tool in place, the higher the utilization of that new process and tool, the more successful you'll be. If you only have 10% of your organization adopt the new process, then the chances of that process being successful are pretty low. But if you get above 80 or close to 90 or above, then your chances increase. And then lastly, it optimizes the proficiency of stakeholders. All right. So one thing to focus on is how OCM enables and drives business strategy. So if you're at the leadership of a company and you identify your business and IT strategies, and then sort of the trickle-down effect, once you have your strategies in place, you would then determine what your business and IT objectives are going to be for a given period, whether it be for a year or 5 years, whatever that period would be. And once you've identified both your strategies and your objectives, then you actually have to implement those and make changes within your organization. So the first thing you need to do is establish supporting processes, or processes that actually support your business objectives and strategies. And then you would develop and implement enabling tools and templates. So if you need to purchase software or develop SharePoint sites or anything that allows you to sort of automate your processes, that's where you would do it. And then once you have those two things in place, you would continually improve your processes, tools, and templates, and it's an ongoing cycle. And then, once those you've had those things in place, then sure enough, within a certain amount of time, your leaders are going to identify new business strategies, and then the process starts again. But really, those three areas that are highlighted in green, the establishing of the processes, the developing your tools and templates, and then your continuous improvement, all of those things are driven by OCM. So if you don't have effective OCM processes and capabilities within your organization, that really hinders your ability to meet your business strategies and your objectives. So you definitely want to have OCM in place. So how do we connect OCM to business results? So you start with a project, and that project has a purpose. You're trying to accomplish something, whether it's implement a new tool or a new process. And then once you sort of have that high-level scope in place, then you break it down into the particulars. What are the roles you're going to need? What are the activities? And what are the ultimate low-level goals of your project? And then lastly, you have the people. These are the stakeholders or the recipients of the outcome of your project. So really, the people are the ultimate foundation for success. If people don't change how they do their job, then it doesn't matter what specific changes are implemented. And if people don't change how they do their job, then we ultimately won't achieve what we set out to do from the beginning. So, as I said, you can have the greatest project in the world, follow the best processes, but if your people don't adopt the outcome and don't adjust their ways of thinking, then really your project is a failure. So you really have to focus on those people and make sure that they make the changes that you need in order to be successful. So the reality is that change creates instability and introduces risk to the organization. So if you take a look at this diagram here on the vertical axis, if you're coming down the vertical axis, that represents increasing resistance and decreasing productivity. And then on the horizontal axis, you've got time moving from left to right. So the little white dot up in the top left corner represents the first communication or the first rumor that a change is going to take place. And just imagine yourself, you're in a situation where you've been trucking along for a couple years, following the same process that you've always followed. You've kind of lulled yourself into a comfort zone. You do the same thing every day. You know exactly what to do on a daily basis. You're comfortable. You can almost do it in your sleep. Well, then you hear that, oh, this is going to change. Well, that immediately sends you into a period of worry and uncertainty, because you start worrying, am I going to lose my autonomy? Am I going to not be able to do the things that I used to be able to do? Is my job going to change? Am I not going to like my work environment anymore? So then you oscillate back and forth. And then as that change progresses, you might even fall into that red area where the risk really goes up and you decide you want to leave, or it gets so risky or so unstable that that's when you start job hunting. You're putting your resume on LinkedIn. People are trying to find new roles in the organization. And so you sort of oscillate in that uncertainty until finally the process or the new change has been adopted. You become comfortable with that, and then you revert back to your comfort zone again. So that's really, imagine yourself implementing a change, and everybody goes through this, whether it's a very minor change or something very major, but at some level, in your mind, you're going through this sort of a comfort level, worry, risk, and then back to comfort level process. So that's just for one change, but what if you were to implement multiple changes simultaneously? Well, as you can see from this diagram, it gets a lot more convoluted, a lot busier. So basically, those individual changes sort of aggravate and compound one another and make the instability and the risk even worse. So because you're not just dealing with a single change, you're dealing with multiple changes, and everything's happening at one time. So it's just a very risky, uncertain time period. And I think this is more real or more reflective of reality. I know the organization I'm in right now is going through lots and lots of changes, all happening at once. You've got multiple teams sort of competing with one another for resources, and so it just gets very, very hairy. And that's sort of where we are right now. So the next thing to focus on is, what are your anticipated areas of resistance to change? And there's lots of these, but there's really 5 primary areas. And the first of which is a culture of change resistance. I know at Anthem, at least in the area where I work, there are a lot of folks who are COBOL developers who've been working on mainframe systems, who have been there for 30 years, and they're very set in their ways. These are very smart people that are very successful and know what they're doing, but they haven't had to change very much over the last 30 years. And so even if they may not mean to be, they have developed a resistance to change, and that is sort of part of their culture. So it makes it difficult to implement new processes and tools. The second bullet here, competing priorities across teams. So as I said, you've got different teams with different areas of focus, different priorities. They're all competing for the same resources, whether that be time, money, or people. And so that sort of competition inserts resistance to changes, because you can't just easily implement your change because you're having to compete with other activities. And then you've got negative past experience with change. I know I've been in situations where change has just not been handled very well, and it was a very negative experience for me. So then the next time I went through a change, I went into it sort of biased against that change because I didn't want to experience that same negative experience again. So some people, whether it's conscious or not, that negative past experience definitely affects how you approach the next change you go through. And then, as I mentioned, resource constraints. You've got limited time, money, and people, and so just trying to make all these changes within those constraints can be very difficult to do, and in some cases may prevent you from achieving the goal that you were trying to achieve. And then those are sort of the passive resistance. The last bullet here is more about active resistance. You may have some people who, that don't like that you were hired to implement a change, or they think that they should be the one that does it, and so they're actively working against you. Hopefully that sort of resistance is a minimum, but I think it warrants being listed here because it definitely happens. I've experienced it. I'm experiencing that now, so it is definitely something that needs to be managed and mitigated in order to be successful. So what is the resistance life cycle? Based on research, some of you may be familiar with the stages of grief that some people go through, I think most people go through it to some extent, but if you lose a loved one or a pet or something like that, there are stages of grief you go through where it may be very hurtful in the beginning, but then over time, you still may miss that person or that pet, but the pain dulls a little bit, and then after several years, it's a memory, it's a fond memory, but it doesn't hurt as bad. I know that seems a little morbid, but it really is. There really is a correlation to the stages of grief to the stages of resistance for change, and everybody progresses through these stages of resistance. It may go very quickly. You may go from the blame stage at the very bottom of this ladder to the acceptance. I mean, that may all happen in a 5-minute time period for a very simple change. But you still, in your brain or in your mind, may quickly progress through these stages until you get to that point of acceptance, and then you start focusing on ongoing improvement. But I just thought that this was a useful way to think about it. When you make a change and people are resisting, put yourself in their shoes and kind of try to understand where they are in their resistance life cycle. They may be losing power that they had before. They may be losing the autonomy that they had before, and it's painful. And it's a very negative experience for that person. So even though they may want to adopt the change, they're experiencing pain, and that is surfacing as resistance. And it may be coming across as if they're being difficult and not working with you, but it's just because they're trying to manage that pain that they're going through. So just try to keep that in mind when you're implementing a change. So what are the risks of not adopting OCM? So we're just sort of flipping the script here a little bit and saying, okay, let's just say we ignore this and don't adopt it. What are the risks of doing that? So not adopting OCM leads to lower productivity. The passive and active resistance that I talked about in the last slide. It could lead to turnover of valued employees. People just get so frustrated that they just walk out and go find other jobs. Disinterest in the current or future state. So people just lose interest because it's so frustrating. Arguing about the need for change. Some people may say, we don't need to make this change. Things are fine just like they are. Other people may say the current situation is bad. We need to change. And so there's no agreement across individuals and teams. More people taking sick days or not showing up. That can be a sign of just people are checked out and don't want to deal with the hassle and the pain that goes along with the change. Changes not being fully implemented. You may start the process of changes and then not actually get to the end point. And so you're stuck in this sort of a quasi state where the change is half implemented and processes don't work well, tools aren't designed to handle that quasi state, and it just makes your life much harder in order to get things done. So that leads to more resistance. People finding workarounds. So if you don't eliminate uh, ways of doing things, if you're trying to implement a particular path and there are other paths available, people will find the path to least resistance, and that may not be the path you want them to follow. So it's kind of like herding cats. You're trying to get everybody in a straight line, and they're running all over the place. The next bullet, people revert to the old way of doing things. It's very easy to fall back into that comfort zone. So people can very quickly, if things get frustrating, they just go back to their old way because it's the easiest way to get their work done and to, to still be able to leave at 5 o'clock at the end of the day. The change being totally scrapped. So it may just get so frustrating and so painful to people that the organization just gives up on its goal and the change never happens. Some people might be happy about that because they didn't want the change to begin with. But if that change would have really, if it had been successful, it could have brought serious value to the organization. And so now the organization is much worse off because they don't have that change. And then lastly, divides are created between us and them. So you've got the people in one camp fighting against the people in the second camp, and it just creates sort of a negative working environment. And I think I saw a question pop up. Norval, was there something I need to address, or should I move forward? Are you guys still there?
Yes, we're still here.
Okay, all right, just making sure. All right, what are the three elements of project success? So if you really think about it, and this is, if you're used to the project management sort of constraint triangle, this will make a lot of sense to you. There are really three elements, one of which is leadership and sponsorship. And that element provides guidance and governance when you're implementing a change. Then you've got project management, which gives structure to the technical side of the change. So that's more of the process, how you're going to implement the change, what steps, what activities, that type of thing. And then lastly, the third element is change management. That is what supports the people side of the change. And so you need all three elements. All three must be present for project success. If any one of those is missing, then your likelihood of being successful in implementing a change goes way down. But if you do have those three things and they're managed correctly, that's when projects meet their objectives, projects finish on time and on budget, and you realize your return on investment for that project. So there are three states of change, and those states exist at both the organizational level and the individual contributor level. So each person really goes through these things, and it is the aggregate experience of each individual person that really comes together to make to define the success or failure at the organizational level. So everyone starts in their current state of where they are in their current experience. It's how you do your job today. And then you go through a transition state, which may vary in length or complexity, but that's how I will move from the current to the future state. And then lastly, you end up with your future state, which is how you will do your job after the change has been implemented. So every change sort of goes through those states and through that life cycle. And as I said, the organization's future state is actually the collection of all of the individual future states. So how do you manage organizational change at the macro level, or really at that organizational level? So ProSci provides an organizational change management process. And this process is a structured process for managing the people side of change on a project or initiative. The process is research-based, so it's based on experiences from lots of different companies of different sizes, different countries, different industries. It's holistic, it's easy to apply, and it's scalable to various project sizes, complexity, different industries, all that type of thing. And so this is why I think that this is such a useful process. The process is broken down into three primary phases, and I'll discuss those in future slides. So it's a three-phase OCM process, and it starts with an input, and that input is a change to how an organization operates and does work. And examples of those are listed below there. It could be a merger or acquisition. It could be development of a new product or tool. It could be a productivity improvement initiative or the implementation of an ERP system. So that's the input. And you start with the first phase, which is preparing for change. And as you progress through each of the phases, under phase one, when you prepare, that's where you define your change management strategy, you prepare your change management team, and you develop your sponsorship model. Then you progress into the second phase, which is managing the change. And this is where you would develop change management plans, and you would actually take action and implement those plans. So that's really where that execution takes place, is during that managing change phase. And then the third phase is reinforcing change. And this is where you would collect and analyze feedback, you would diagnose gaps and manage resistance, and you would implement corrective actions and celebrate successes. So at the end of that three-phase process, you would have the output, and there would be at least two outputs. One would be individuals would be making changes to how they do their work from their own current state to their own future state. That's at the individual level, and then there would be benefits to the organization. Those would be realized. So you would have both outputs at the individual as well as the organizational levels. So that's the macro or organizational process, but how do you manage change down at that individual level? So ProSci has devised a system that they refer to with the acronym ADKAR. And ADKAR describes the key building blocks for successful change, whether it be personal or professional. Success with change requires all elements of the ADKAR model to be present. So you can't skip any, because if you do, that inserts problems. And the acronym ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And I'll dive into those in the next slide. So managing individual change. So you start with awareness. And what you need to do is develop or build the awareness or instill the awareness of the need for the change in the organization and of the nature of the change. So you just make people aware of, look, we need to change, and here's why, and at a high level, this is the change we're going to be implementing, just to get people ready for it. The next step is to build the desire to support the change. So you need to be sort of a cheerleader and get people on board and sort of geared up and psyched out to do this change and to participate and engage in the change. So that's sort of the touchy-feely part of OCM at the individual level. But then the third part is really you start getting a little bit more in depth with, you need to build the knowledge on how to change, because people may be really excited about a change and want to do it, but does not know how to make that change. So, and they need to know how to implement the new skills and behaviors. Because if they're learning something new, they may not know what to do with these new skills or these new tools. The next step, which is really where the rubber meets the road, is you need to build the ability to implement the change. So you may have to send people through training. You may have to just continually coach and work with people to make sure they are able to implement the change and demonstrate the performance that they're proficient at that change. And at that point, that's where you sort of split off. At the end of the ability, that's when that individual would experience the success or failure of the project, which is you've met the objectives, the project is finished on time and on budget, and you're starting to realize the return on your investment based on those the three aspects of change: leadership and sponsorship, project management, and change management. But then the other fork here is where you go into reinforcement. Because if you stop there, then people will very easily revert back to the old way of doing things. Even if they were successful initially, they could very easily slide backwards. So you have to continually reinforce those changes to sustain the change and to build a culture and competence around change. So the reinforcement piece is very important. If you skip it, you're really asking for problems at that point. And that's sort of this next slide sort of summarizes that and sort of explains if you, for any one of those items, if you leave any aspect of the ADKAR model out, what does that do? So if you were to leave the awareness part out, then that would lead to confusion. And that's making the assumption that the other 4 areas are being addressed. So without awareness, then people can be confused. Without desire, then that would lead to resistance because people have no desire to make the change. If they don't have the knowledge, then that would lead to frustration. If they don't have the ability to make the change, then that leads to anxiety and stress because they want to make the change, but they're not able to do it. And then lastly, if you skip the reinforcement part, that's going to lead to false starts, and you may have to completely redo your project again. So really, the only way to have successful change is to have all 5 aspects of the individual change ADKAR model in place and managed well. So how do you connect the individual and macro organizational change management pieces? So over on the left-hand side, these are the macro OCM tools, and these are the things that would be developed during that second phase of the macro model. Let me just go back. So phase 2 here of the macro model, this is where those tools would be developed during that managing change piece. So you've got communications, sponsor roadmap, coaching of the recipients, the resistance management, and training. So those are tools that take place at the macro level during that phase 2. But at the individual level, those things can be mapped to the ADKAR pieces, so awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And you can see there are multiple touch points because if you see all those arrows in the middle, that shows that there are multiple touch points between each of the macro level tools and the individual phases of change. So that's really where the individual and the organizational change management pieces are integrated. So let's talk about the differences between OCM, or organizational change management, and project management. So as I mentioned before, project management focuses on the technical side of moving from the current state to the future state. And OCM, or change management, focuses on the people side of moving from the current state to the future state. Both of them have processes. For those of you familiar with PMI's project management methodology, the project lifecycle includes initiation, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. And each of those process steps or phases have associated tools that are listed there. For instance, your statement of work, your charter, your business case, your schedule, your resource allocations, those types of things. So those are project management tools. At the change management level, as I mentioned before, you've got both organizational and individual level processes. At the organizational level, the phases are preparing for change, managing change, and reinforcing change. And the individual level, you've got the ADKAR process. The tools associated with OCM include individual change models, readiness assessments, communication plans, coaching plans, and just general reinforcement. So if you have all those things combined, well, first you want to integrate OCM and project management. So project management and OCM activities are most effective when they are integrated as opposed to being handled separately. And unfortunately, in many instances, OCM is an add-on after the project has experienced obstacles. So a lot of times people forget about the need to manage change and they just force a change through. And then when they start realizing that people aren't adopting or they're experiencing resistance, then they come back and try to implement OCM. And at that point, you've lost time and you may have missed the mark. Your project may not even be successful because you've waited too late. So you want to definitely integrate OCM and make sure that you start thinking about OCM at the beginning of your project. So once you have integrated OCM and project management, then you have a solution that is designed, developed, and delivered effectively. That's the technical side. And you have a solution that is embraced, adopted, and utilized effectively. And that's the people side. And if you have both of those, that equals success. Project management and change management have a joint value proposition that's oriented towards business results. So both are necessary. Both are focused on meeting business objectives, but you can really only be successful if you handle both. You can't ignore one over the other. So how do you balance project management and OCM? How much project management is needed? That depends on the complexity and the degree of change to processes, systems, organization, structure, and job roles. I'll just use this as a very simple example. If you are simply changing the color of the paint on a wall, that's a relatively simple change that doesn't really require a lot of project management. You go, you pick the paint color, you buy it, you bring it back, you paint the wall, you're done. It doesn't require a whole lot of planning. It doesn't require a whole lot of schedule management. So the project itself is pretty simple. But if you're building a new highway system that affects lots of locations and is gonna, you have to worry about safety and all of those different laws and all of that, that's a very complex endeavor. And so that's gonna require a very rigorous project management process. So how much change management is needed? That depends on the amount of disruption created in individual employees' day-to-day work and the organization attributes like culture, value system, and history with past changes. So again, if you're just painting a room, there probably isn't a whole lot of change management. You might experience some resistance to, some people may not like the color that you picked, so you'll have to work through that. But it's not a whole lot that you have to handle. But back to that highway system, you've got a lot of people that are affected by building new roads. People may lose property. It's going to change the landscape. So there's lots of change management that you have to handle when it comes to a project like that. So you just really have to scale the amount of project and change management required based on the situation. So how do you a way to visualize this all together? So this is the big picture, and at the top you've got the PMI project management lifecycle phases. So you've got the intake, which is where you identify the need for new work, you initiate a project, you plan it, you execute it, and you close it. And then while you're executing and all of those activities, you're monitoring and controlling to make sure that you're staying on track in terms of scope and budget and risk and schedule and that type of thing. So that's your project management layer. Then you've got, if you're a software company or organization that builds software, underneath that project management layer, you've got your software development lifecycle. And this particular diagram is just looking at a traditional waterfall or sequenced type of delivery. So you've got your discovery phases where you're identifying high-level requirements. You go through design, you construct, you go through system integration testing, user acceptance testing, you handle change readiness to make sure the organization is ready for the new system. You go through training, you implement that new system, and then you go through a period of warranty where the project team stays intact and you continue to support the new system, and then you close the project. So that's your project management and your software development life cycles together. The third layer is OCM. And you can tell by the color coding which activities line up with other activities. So preparing for change sort of align, the color coding as well as the placement on the diagram. So preparing for change sort of aligns with those discovery and intake and initiation phases above. The managing change aligns with the design through most of implementation, and then reinforcing change aligns with the warranty or sort of the end of implementation, warranty, and the closeout portions. So OCM reinforcing change phase continues on after the project is continued or after the project is closed to ensure the full benefits of the change are achieved and sustained. So just keep in mind that reinforcing change continues on even after the project has finished. So that is a sort of how things tie together from a waterfall perspective. But what if you're working more in a hybrid environment where you're not really waterfall, or you may have a mixture of waterfall and agile processes in place. So this diagram shows how OCM ties back to a hybrid or modern waterfall type of situation. So you've got your iterations at the bottom where you're going through the sort of agile style iterations of development, but then you can see how the overlap, the OCM phases sort of overlap because as you go through each iteration, you're going to revisit, you're going to go through preparing for change, managing change, and reinforcing change, and you'll go through that for each cycle or iteration. And then if you're in a Kanban style of situation, then this diagram shows how OCM maps to a Kanban style of project. So the preparing for change maps to your input stream identification and sort of carries over into the work in progress. And then that's when you switch over to managing change, and then at the end, you switch to reinforcing change until you're complete with the project. So the point of these diagrams is this to show that OCM can apply in every situation, every type of software development, every type of project. There is a way to apply. You just have to customize it to meet your needs. And then lastly, if you're in a pure agile type of environment, then you can see that OCM also applies in an agile situation as well. So who manages change? Really, you've got executives and senior managers, middle managers, change management and resource team, your project team, and your project support functions. Each gear plays a specific role based on how they are related to organizational change. And those key roles are identified on this slide. I won't go into this in a whole lot of detail because I know we're running out of time, so I want to allow time for you guys to ask questions. But I just be aware that I have identified who the primary players are and sort of identified what their roles are in implementing OCM process. So if you do this yourself in your own organization, you can use this as a foundation in order to start. And then how you structure your OCM teams depends on the needs of your situation. I won't go through all of these in detail, but each one of these little diagrams here gives you another option for how you can implement OCM, your OCM capability within your organization. For instance, in this first diagram, OCM is a subset of the project team, but there are multiple, this covers the next two slides, so you can see that there are multiple models for how to set up your organization. So I would suggest that you review these and determine which one makes the most sense for your situation and then customize it as needed. And of course, ProSci provides a whole lot of background information. So once you pick the model that you think works the best, you can do some additional research on the ProSci website. And then just to let you know, there is a similar to the CMMI sort of capability maturity model. For those of you that are familiar with that, ProSci has developed a change management maturity model that you can use to assess the maturity of your organization in change management. And then you can use this to periodically, as your processes mature, you can see if you progress along the path of increasing maturity for organizational change management. So in conclusion, 5 main points. If you don't take anything else from today's presentation, change management focuses on the people side of organizational change. It involves both an individual and an organizational perspective. It requires action and involvement by leaders and managers throughout the organization. And change management and project management are both tools that support project benefit realization. Project management is the technical side of change, and change management is the people side. And then lastly, change management is most effective when it is launched at the beginning of a project and integrated into the project activities. So I know that was a lot of material, but again, I was hoping to just provide you with a foundation that you could then use to begin maturing your change management capability for your own organization. So I'll open the floor. Any questions or comments?
Okay, Eric, thanks very much. We do have some questions in the chat box.
Sure.
The first one is, it sounds as if you would need management support to build a team to investigate an OCM before information can be gathered to support the benefit of OCM. What strategies do you recommend to gain the necessary support of management?
So there's lots of ways of doing this. You can start off by doing some research and diving into some more detail on the ProSci website. If you can convince your leadership to maybe send one or two individuals to the ProSci sort of certification, then that would open you up to having access to the templates and the tools and a lot more information that you could then use to spread that knowledge across the organization. But there's definitely, ProSci offers a lot of research in different industries to allow you to see the benefit of organizational change management and help you develop that business case to convince your leadership that it's something worthwhile. So definitely visit that ProSci website for additional information.
Okay, the next question, are there any rules for how often to evaluate the effectiveness of an OCM system?
So that differs based on your organization, but I would say, you want to optimize it, because if you do it too frequently, you start spending all your time on determining if your change is successful. But you need to, sort of reach an equilibrium where if you go too long, then you may be experiencing resistance that you're not even aware of. So it just sort of depends on the complexity of the change that you're making. And, if a lot of people are being affected potentially negatively by a change, then you would probably want to assess the success of your change management processes on a more frequent basis. If it is a relatively benign change that doesn't really affect a lot of people negatively, then you may not have to do it as frequently. So there's no cookie cutter answer for that. It just needs to be scaled based on the situation that you're in.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question here. We got a couple minutes left. One participant is asking, are there any specific applications that you're aware of where OCM was successful besides at Anthem?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I would say, successful organizational change takes place. Let me just think off the top of my head. If you're trying to get people to use a new tool, for instance, going through all of the marketing that goes along with that, making sure that people are aware of it, that they have the desire to use it, that they have the knowledge of how and where to get it, that they have the ability to obtain access to that, and then you're continually, for instance, I'm sitting in my house right now and I'm looking at the Alexa system made by Amazon. They've gone through advertisement. They continually add new processes and new continuous improvement to the tool. So you're getting more and more capability, and it just becomes more and more integrated into your daily life. So that is just one example of how an organization has used technology to really change how people work, or move forward in their daily lives. Organizational change management happens all over the place. It's just a matter of being able to formalize it and define it and make it a repeatable process within your organization.
Okay, one person is asking, is there any way that a copy of the slides can be obtained for reference for future projects? And we already know the answer to that is yes.
Yes, I'll be obtaining these slides, or I'll be sending you these slides right afterwards.
Okay, we'll move on here. Just want to reinforce that message just so people will know that they should expect it. Since an OCM focuses on people, do you measure how people feel about the change?
Yes, absolutely. I think part of that coaching and mentoring that we mentioned that happens in that second phase is you want to be involved with your people, and you want to understand where each individual is, where, if it makes sense in that, in the stages of change resistance, making sure you kind of understand where they're coming from. This is where your empathy skills come in, because you want to kind of put yourself in their shoes and understand why is it they're resisting? What are they losing because of this change? And help them manage through it, either by helping them determine what their new role is going to be, or, if their role is being eliminated, help them find a new position, that type of thing. But every person is experiencing a change in their own individual way. And so you definitely want to be in touch with those people and find out, ask questions. You can't just sit in a locked room somewhere and manage change without talking to the people that are being affected and expect to be successful, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. There does not appear to be. Thank you to the folks who shared their comments about the webinar. Really appreciate that. It looks like we're going to call it for now, since we are a little bit over time here. I'd like to thank Eric once again for presenting this talk for us today.
Sure, and thank you guys very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And it was a great first effort, considering it was your first webinar.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thanks to you all for showing up for us today. Quick reminder that our next webinar will be on Thursday, June the 7th. It will be Risk Management and Product Realization with Barbara Young, who's a risk manager for Siemens Healthcare Diagnostics. Until that time, I'd like to wish everybody a great rest of the day, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot now. Bye.
Thank you.